I am Serena, 32 years old, and my husband thinks I am a failed graphic designer who spends her days clipping coupons. In reality, I am the founder and CEO of Aegis Analytics, a firm that specializes in forensic accounting and high-stakes corporate espionage. I have spent the last 5 years hiding my 7-figure income to protect myself from gold diggers, only to realize I married into a family of them. Yesterday, the facade finally cracked. The sound of leather striking glass is a noise you never forget. My husband Jason stood over me in our living room, his face purple with rage, holding his designer belt like a whip. He swung it down hard again, smashing a crystal vase on the coffee table just inches from my hand. Shards of glass flew across the room, but I did not flinch. I did not scream. I sat perfectly still on the beige sofa, crossing my legs. Jason roared at me, demanding I confess. He called me a whore. He screamed that he knew about the man at the hotel. He demanded the truth. I looked him dead in the eye and told him if he wanted the truth, he should look at the 85-inch television screen behind him. With a single press of a button on the remote, I did not play a confession. I played a 4K resolution video of his mother Patricia tangled in the sheets of the master bedroom with his own brother-in-law Jamal. The color drained from Jason's face faster than the blood dripping from his hand where the glass had grazed him. But before we get to the moment, I destroyed their lives with a single video file. You need to understand why I stayed silent for so long. It began 48 hours earlier at the 30th wedding anniversary dinner for my in-laws Henry and Patricia. The event was held at a private dining room in Greenwich that smelled of old money and desperation. I walked in wearing a simple black dress, carrying a bottle of vintage red wine wrapped in velvet. I had spent weeks preparing my mind for this night, knowing exactly how Patricia operated. She thrived on public humiliation. When Jason and I approached the main table, I saw the seating cards. There was a seat for Jason next to his father. There was a seat for Emily, his sister, and her husband Jamal. But there was no seat for me. Patricia looked up, feigning surprise, and covered her mouth with a manicured hand that held a diamond she didn't pay for. She told the room that she assumed I wouldn't mind sitting at the children's table in the corner, since the adult table was strictly for family members contributing to the legacy. The other guests, mostly business partners and golf buddies of Jason, chuckled nervously. Jason did not defend me. He simply shrugged and told me not to make a scene. I walked to the small round table in the back, squeezing my knees against a chair meant for a 5-year-old, while the waiters poured the wine I had brought. Patricia stopped the waiter loudly. She picked up the bottle I had placed on the gift table and held it up to the light like she was inspecting a dirty rag. She announced to the room that while they appreciated the gesture, they would not be serving this supermarket vinegar to guests with refined palates. She told the waiter to put it in the kitchen for cooking stock. The room erupted in polite, mocking laughter. I watched them laugh. I watched Jason laugh the hardest. He leaned over to his mother and apologized for my lack of taste, saying he tried to teach me, but some people just cannot be refined. I took a sip of water to wash down the bile rising in my throat. They had no idea that the bottle she just dismissed was a Grand Reserve from the Vance Vineyard in Napa Valley. A vineyard I bought 3 years ago. That single bottle retailed for $800 and was rated 99 points by top sommeliers. But I said nothing. I let them drink their overpriced acidic house wine while I mentally calculated the net worth of everyone at the table. I was the wealthiest person in the room by a factor of 10, and they were treating me like the hired help. The humiliation didn't end with the wine. Halfway through the main course, Jason waved at me from across the room. He snapped his fingers, actually snapped them, and pointed to the ice bucket near the bar. He told me to be useful and fetch more ice for the investors, since I wasn't contributing anything else to the conversation. I stood up. I walked to the bar. I filled the bucket. As I placed it on their table, Patricia patted my hand condescendingly and told me that at least I was good at domestic tasks. That was strike one. I went home that night and updated my encrypted files. I wasn't just taking notes. I was building a case. The next morning, the financial noose began to tighten. I was standing in the checkout line at Whole Foods, my cart full of organic kale and supplements for Jason's father, Henry. Henry was the only one in that family with a soul, but his dementia was getting worse, and I was the only one ensuring he ate properly. The cashier rang up the total, $215. I swiped the joint credit card Jason allowed me to carry. The machine beeped. Declined. I tried again. Declined. The line behind me started to shift and sigh. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks not from shame, but from anger. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Jason. He said he had lowered the limit on the card because I was spending too recklessly. He told me that from now on he would leave $20 cash on the kitchen counter each morning, and I had to make it work. He said it was time I learned the value of $1 since I didn't earn any. I looked at the text, then I looked at the cashier who was giving me a look of pure pity. She thought I was a broke housewife with a controlling husband. She was half right. I excused myself and stepped aside, pretending to search my purse. I pulled out my second phone, a secure device that Jason didn't know existed. I opened my banking app. A notification flashed on the screen. My quarterly dividend from Aegis Analytics had just cleared. $500,000. My checking account balance had more zeros than Jason's entire life savings. I reached into the hidden lining of my wallet and pulled out a heavy black titanium card. The American Express Centurion, the black card. I walked back to the register and handed it to the cashier. Her eyes widened. She looked from my worn-out sneakers to the card, then back to me. I simply smiled and told her to put it through. Transaction approved. I threw the receipt in the trash on the way out. Jason wanted to play games with $20 while I was effectively funding his father's medical care through shell companies. I was the one paying for the nursing staff. I was the one paying for the expensive memory medication that Patricia claimed was covered by insurance. I was keeping his family afloat, and he was cutting off my grocery money. That was strike two. Before I tell you how they tried to frame me to steal the rest of my dignity, I need to ask you something. Have you ever let someone think they had power over you, just waiting for the perfect moment to pull the rug out? If you want to see exactly how a $20 allowance turned into a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, hit that subscribe button right now. The best revenge is served cold, and I have a freezer full of it. I returned home to a driveway full of cars. This was not a casual visit. This was an ambush. I walked into the house with the groceries, and I felt the air pressure drop. Jason was standing in the center of the living room. His mother, Patricia, was sitting on the main armchair like a judge. Jamal and Emily were flanking her. They looked like vultures circling a carcass. Jason didn't say hello. He reached behind him and grabbed a manila envelope. He threw it at me. The contents spilled onto the floor. Photographs. Dozens of them. Grainy, zoomed-in photos of me entering a luxury hotel with a man in a suit. Photos of us having lunch. Photos of him handing me a key card. Jason's voice was shaking. He told me the game was over. He said the family had hired a private investigator because they suspected I was up to no good. He said these photos proved I was cheating on him with some rich sugar daddy. Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. She said she always knew I was trash. She said I was prostituting myself because Jason wasn't rich enough for my greedy tastes. Emily started crying, fake sobbing into a tissue, saying she couldn't believe I would do this to her brother. Jamal shook his head, looking disgusted, muttering about the sanctity of marriage. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. I looked at the photos on the floor. The man in the picture was not a lover. He was the chief financial officer of a Fortune 500 company, and he was one of my biggest clients. We were at the hotel for a secure handover of a forensic audit report regarding massive embezzlement in his firm. The key card was for a secure conference room, not a bedroom. But I couldn't tell them that, not yet. Jason stepped forward, puffed out his chest, and delivered the ultimatum. He had divorce papers ready. He said if I signed them now admitting to adultery and waiving all rights to spousal support or any assets, he wouldn't post these photos on social media. He wouldn't ruin my reputation. He said he was being generous. He told me to sign the papers, take my $20, and get out of his house. I looked at Jason. I looked at the smug satisfaction on Patricia's face. I looked at Jamal, who was checking his watch, a Rolex Daytona that I knew for a fact had gone missing from Henry's jewelry box 2 weeks ago. I realized then that this wasn't just about hating me. This was a coordinated strike. They wanted me out of the way so they could finalize their plan for Henry's estate without my prying eyes. They needed a scapegoat, and they chose the silent wife. That was strike 3. I dropped the grocery bags. I didn't pick up the photos. I walked past Jason toward the bedroom. He grabbed my arm. He told me I wasn't going anywhere until I signed. I pulled my arm away and told him I would not sign a lie. I told him his investigator was an idiot and his evidence was garbage. That was when the mask fell off completely. Jason wasn't just a petty, controlling husband anymore. He was a cornered animal. He reached for his belt loops. He began to unbuckle the leather strap. The metallic clink of the buckle echoed in the silent room. Patricia took a sip of her wine and watched her eyes gleaming with excitement. Jamal pulled out his phone to record. They wanted a show. They wanted to break me. They had no idea I had already rigged the theater with explosives. The belt came loose in Jason's hand. He doubled it over and snapped it. The sound was like a gunshot. And that brings us back to the moment where I sat on the sofa, waiting for him to strike with my finger, hovering over the play button that would end his entire world. The living room of our Greenwich estate had been transformed into a courtroom, and the verdict had already been decided long before I walked through the door. The air was thick with the scent of Patricia's expensive perfume and the underlying metallic smell of adrenaline. They had formed a calculated semicircle around me, blocking the exits, forcing me to stand with my back against the cold marble of the fireplace. It was a classic intimidation tactic, one I had seen used in corporate boardrooms and hostile takeovers a dozen times. But this was personal. This was my husband's family trying to eviscerate me. Jamal, my brother-in-law, took a step forward, separating himself from the pack. He was a man who thrived on attention, a man who had never worked an honest day in his life, but wore Italian suits paid for by his wife's trust fund. He smoothed the lapels of his navy blazer and looked at me with a gaze that was supposed to be intimidating, but only registered as pathetic to someone with my training. He was playing the role of the moral guardian, the protector of the family honor. The hypocrisy was so dense it was almost suffocating. Jamal cleared his throat, ensuring he had everyone's full attention before he began his performance. He started by shaking his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment plastered on his handsome face. He told me that he had always suspected I was not cut out for this life. He said that entering a family of this caliber required a certain level of integrity that I clearly lacked. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that could sell sand to a desert nomad, which was exactly how he had convinced Emily to marry him 5 years ago. He pointed a finger at me, accusing me of betraying not just Jason, but the very foundation of the household. He used words like filth and disgrace. He called me a parasitic opportunist who had used his brother-in-law for housing and food while sneaking around cheap motels with strange men. He painted a picture of me as a desperate low-class woman who couldn't control her urges, projecting his own shadow onto me with terrifying accuracy. I watched his mouth move. I watched the way his lips curled when he said the word whore. It was a word he enjoyed using. It gave him power. He lectured me on the sanctity of marriage, talking about how a wife's duty is to be the anchor of the home, not the wrecking ball. He spoke about loyalty as if he invented the concept. Every sentence was a lie, but he delivered them with the conviction of a preacher. He turned to Jason, placing a hand on my husband's shoulder, offering him solidarity. He told Jason that he was too good for me, that a man of Jason's stature deserved a woman who understood the meaning of fidelity. He said that in his house with Emily, honesty was the only policy, and he couldn't imagine looking his wife in the eye if he had secrets. The sheer audacity of his statement almost made me laugh, but I kept my face essentially paralyzed. I was in deep analysis mode. I was recording every word, every gesture, every inflection for the mental file I was building. While Jamal was busy assassinating my character, Emily was providing the background noise. She was curled up on the love seat, clutching a box of tissues, wailing theatrically. Her tears were real, but her grief was misplaced. She wasn't crying for Jason. She was crying because she had been programmed to cry whenever conflict arose. She looked up at me through red, swollen eyes and asked how I could do this. She asked how I could bring such shame to their doorstep. She said that the neighbors would talk, that the club members would whisper, and that I had stained the family name forever. Emily was a tragedy of her own making. She was 30 years old, but had the emotional maturity of a teenager. She worshipped Jamal. She believed every lie he fed her, believed that his late nights were spent networking for business ventures that never materialized. She believed he was a visionary entrepreneur, not a con artist draining her inheritance. Now she looked at me with pure hatred, convinced that I was the villain in her perfect world. She echoed Jamal's insults, calling me selfish and cruel. She said she had always tried to welcome me despite Mom's warnings, but now she saw the truth. She said I was toxic. I didn't respond to her wailing. My attention snapped back to Jamal as he raised his hand to emphasize a point about moral decay. The late afternoon sun streaming through the high windows caught the reflection of his wrist. There was a flash of gold, a heavy, distinct glint that I recognized instantly. I narrowed my eyes, zooming in on the detail. On Jamal's left wrist sat a Rolex Daytona with a champagne dial and black subdials. It was the Paul Newman edition. It was a watch that retailed for over $200,000 on the vintage market. My heart rate didn't jump, but my mind raced. That was Henry's watch. My father-in-law Henry had received that watch as a retirement gift from his partners 20 years ago. It was his most prized possession. 3 weeks ago, Henry had called me in a panic, crying because he couldn't find it. He thought his dementia had caused him to misplace it. He had torn his room apart, sobbing that he was losing his mind along with his memories. Patricia had scolded him, telling him he was irresponsible and senile, and that he probably flushed it down the toilet. Jason had dismissed it, saying it would turn up. But it hadn't turned up. It was on Jamal's wrist. Jamal saw me looking at him, but he misread my gaze. He thought I was intimidated by his display of wealth and dominance. He puffed out his chest, adjusting his cuff, unknowingly framing the evidence of his crime. He didn't know that I knew the serial number of that watch by heart because I had insured it for Henry 6 months ago under my own policy. He didn't know that I had already filed a police report for a missing item of significant value pending investigation. He was wearing grand larceny on his arm while lecturing me about ethics. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with violent precision. This wasn't just about getting rid of me. They needed money. Jamal and Patricia were bleeding the estate dry, but they had hit a wall. They had stolen the jewelry, they were skimming the accounts, but it wasn't enough to sustain their lavish lifestyles. They needed total control. And as long as I was the durable power of attorney for Henry's medical decisions, as long as I was the one auditing the household expenses, I was a threat. They had to remove me to strip the carcass of this family clean. Jamal continued his tirade, his voice rising in volume. He stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of scotch and peppermint breath mints, a combination used to mask day drinking. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a menacing growl that only I could hear clearly. He told me that I was garbage. He said that once Jason kicked me out, I would be back on the street where I belonged. He said no one would believe a word I said because I was nobody, and they were the pillars of the community. He called me a gold digger who had finally been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. He was right about one thing. Someone had been caught, but he was too arrogant to realize that he was the one standing in the trap. I looked at the watch again, then up at his smug, confident face. I memorized the smirk. I memorized the way Emily looked at him with adoration while he abused me. I memorized Jason's silence as he let another man insult his wife. I locked these images away in the vault of my mind, fueling the cold fusion reactor in my chest. They wanted a villain, fine. I would be the villain who burned their house of cards to the ground. But first, I had to let them think they had won. I had to let them push me until they thought I was broken. Because the harder they pushed, the more satisfying the snap back would be. Jamal finished his speech and stepped back, crossing his arms, waiting for me to crumble. I simply blinked my face, a mask of eerie calm, and prepared for the next wave of their assault. To understand why I stood there in the living room, absolutely paralyzed by calm, while my husband and his family tore my reputation to shreds, you have to go back exactly 14 days. That was the day I realized that the incompetence in this household was actually a cover for something much more sinister. It started with a discrepancy in the ledger I kept for Henry's medical care. I was the one who managed the payments for his specialized dementia medication, a cocktail of drugs that cost nearly $5,000 a month. When I went to authorize the pharmacy withdrawal, the account was short. Not by a few dollars, but by the exact amount needed for the prescription. I asked Jason about it, and he dismissed me, saying he probably used the wrong card for a golf outing and would replace it. But Jason was a creature of habit. He never used the medical account. That same afternoon, I noticed that the security logs on the smart home system had been manually cleared for the hours of midnight to 4 in the morning for 3 consecutive nights. To the average person, this might look like a glitch. To me, the CEO of a data forensics company, it looked like a sloppy cover-up. Someone in the house was moving around at night, and they didn't want to be seen. I didn't confront anyone. Confrontation gives the enemy time to prepare a defense. Instead, I went to work. That evening, while everyone was distracted by a football game on TV, I told them I was going to update the firmware on the house's central router to improve the internet speed. Jason actually thanked me, complaining that his streaming had been lagging. I sat in the server closet in the basement and uploaded a custom patch I had written myself. It was a mirror protocol. From that moment on, every byte of data that passed through the house's smart system, every camera feed, every audio command, and every digital lock log would be duplicated and sent directly to a private encrypted server in my office downtown. I also reactivated the motion sensors in the hallways and the master bedroom suite, disabling the little LED lights on the cameras so no one would know they were recording. For 2 nights, I saw nothing but Emily sleepwalking to the kitchen for water. But on the 3rd night, my phone alerted me at 2:13 in the morning. I was in bed next to Jason, who was snoring loudly. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my laptop, and went into the bathroom, locking the door. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and opened the live feed. What I saw made my stomach turn, but what I heard made my blood run cold. The camera in the upstairs hallway showed a door opening. It was the guest room where Jamal and Emily were staying while their house was being renovated. Jamal stepped out. He wasn't wearing pajamas. He was dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt, moving with a stealth that suggested practice. He didn't go to the kitchen. He walked straight to the other end of the hall to the master suite where Henry and Patricia slept. I switched camera views to the camera inside the master bedroom. This was a camera Henry had asked me to install years ago, so he could check on the dogs when he was away. A camera Patricia insisted was broken. I had fixed it remotely. Jamal entered the room. The bed was empty of Henry, who had been moved to the downstairs suite a month ago because he couldn't handle the stairs. Only Patricia was there, sitting up in bed, reading a magazine by the light of a lamp. She didn't look surprised to see her son-in-law. She didn't scream. She smiled, a smile that was both seductive and predatory. Jamal walked over to the bed, and without a word he kissed her. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek. It was passionate. It was grotesque. I had to close my eyes for a second to process the sheer depravity of it. My mother-in-law and my sister-in-law's husband. But the physical affair was just the tip of the iceberg. After a few minutes, they stopped and began to talk. The audio quality from the high-definition camera was crystal clear. I turned up the volume, my fingers hovering over the keyboard to transcribe every word. Patricia complained that Henry was lingering too long. She said the doctors were too good, that the medication I was buying was working too well. She said his moments of clarity were dangerous because he kept asking for his lawyer. Jamal laughed a low, cruel sound. He sat on the edge of the bed and told her not to worry. He said he had already spoken to a contact of his, a shady notary, who was willing to overlook certain protocols. Then came the hammer blow. Jamal asked if the new draft of the will was ready. Patricia reached into her nightstand and pulled out a document. She told him that she had revised the terms exactly as they discussed. In this new version, due to Henry's incapacitation, full power of attorney, and control over the entire estate, including the liquid assets and the property portfolio, would transfer solely to Patricia. Upon her death, management of the family trust would bypass Jason and Emily completely. The justification written in the legal jargon was that Jason was financially incompetent, and Emily was too emotionally unstable to manage wealth. The control would be handed to a third-party trustee, Jamal. They were planning a coup. They were going to cut Jason and Emily out of their own father's inheritance while they were still alive. Jamal bragged that Emily was so stupid she would sign a waiver of rights if he told her it was a tax document. He called his wife a useful idiot. He called Jason a pompous fool who couldn't sell water in a drought. Patricia laughed and agreed, saying that she should have never let Jason marry me because I was too sharp, that I asked too many questions about the household budget. I sat on the cold tile floor of my bathroom, listening to them plot the destruction of the people they were supposed to love. I realized then that the missing money for the medication wasn't lost. Patricia had pocketed it. She was deliberately under-medicating Henry to accelerate his decline, to make him easier to manipulate, or worse, to hasten his death before he could lucidly object to the new will. This wasn't just greed. This was active, malicious abuse of a vulnerable elder. The conversation ended with Jamal assuring Patricia that once the papers were signed next week, they could stop hiding. He said once the money was theirs, he would divorce Emily. Patricia would put Henry in a state facility and they would travel to Europe together. It was sickening. It was a level of evil I hadn't prepared for. I saved the video file. I backed it up to 3 different cloud servers. I flagged the timestamp. That was 2 weeks ago. For 14 days I had to walk around that house, knowing that the man sitting across from me at breakfast was sleeping with his mother-in-law and planning to rob his wife blind. I had to watch Patricia play the doting grandmother role while she poisoned the family tree from the roots up. I had to watch Jason and Emily, 2 people I didn't particularly like, but who were nonetheless victims, be mocked behind their backs by the people they trusted most. So when Jamal stood in front of me in the living room, wearing Henry's stolen watch, accusing me of betraying the family, I didn't feel fear. I felt the heavy weight of the ammunition I was carrying. He was firing blanks. I was sitting on a nuclear warhead. I looked at him, and for a split second I almost pitied him. He thought he was the predator. He had no idea he was locked in a cage with a beast far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. The investigation was over. The evidence was secured. And as I sat there listening to their lies, I knew it was finally time to press play. The room was spinning with accusations, but I stood in the center of the storm like a stone pillar. Jamal stepped back, satisfied with his performance. And that was when Jason decided it was his turn to play the role of the alpha male. He had been quiet while another man insulted his wife. But now, emboldened by his brother-in-law's fabricated moral high ground, Jason felt the need to exert his own pathetic brand of dominance. He walked towards me, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor, stopping only when he was close enough that I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of manic rage and desperation. He pointed a shaking finger at the floor right in front of Patricia's feet. "Get on your knees!" Jason spat out. The command hung in the air, grotesque and medieval. He told me that I had disrespected his mother in her own house. He said that after everything his family had done for me, after they had graciously allowed a nobody like me to carry the Vance name, the least I could do was show some humility. He demanded that I kneel down and beg for Patricia's forgiveness before we even discussed the terms of the divorce. He wanted a show of submission. He wanted to break my spirit before he broke my bank account. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just looked at him, analyzing the man I had shared a bed with for 5 years. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the way his eyes darted to his mother for approval like a dog checking with its master. It was pathetic. It was tragic. And it was the final confirmation that the man I thought I married had never really existed. He was just an extension of her will, a hollow vessel filled with her poison. When I refused to move, Patricia let out a sharp, cold laugh. She swirled the red wine in her glass, watching the liquid coat the sides, looking for all the world like a queen, contemplating the execution of a peasant. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and gave me a look of mock sympathy that was far more vicious than any scream could have been. She told Jason to calm down, acting as if she were the voice of reason. She said that there was no need for physical force when we had leverage. She looked me dead in the eye and laid out her offer. She called it an act of mercy. She said that if I signed the papers right now, if I admitted to the infidelity in writing and agreed to leave the marriage with absolutely zero assets, she would keep the photos private. She promised that if I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back, she would not upload the pictures of me and my client to every social media platform in Greenwich. She said she would spare me the public shame of being known as the slut who cheated on a Vance. She spoke as if she were doing me a favor, as if she were saving me from social annihilation. The gaslighting was masterful. They were taking a situation where they were the abusers, the thieves, and the liars, and they were twisting reality until I was the villain. They were threatening to destroy a reputation that I had built with blood, sweat, and tears, a reputation they didn't even understand. In their small delusional world, being shunned by the Greenwich Country Club was a fate worse than death. They had no idea that in my world, in the high-stakes arena of global security and corporate intelligence, their little country club was irrelevant. They were threatening a lion with a mousetrap. I looked at Patricia, seeing the greed radiating off her like heat waves. She didn't care about Jason's feelings. She didn't care about the sanctity of marriage. She wanted me gone because I was the only thing standing between her and Henry's money. She wanted me to leave empty-handed so there would be more for her and Jamal to steal. It was a financial transaction disguised as a moral crusade. I turned my head slowly and looked at Jason. He was breathing hard, waiting for my answer, waiting for me to crumble. I needed to ask him one question. I needed to give him one final chance to prove that there was a shred of humanity left inside him, a single spark of independent thought that hadn't been extinguished by his mother. I needed to know if the last 5 years had meant anything at all. I kept my voice low, steady, and devoid of the hysteria they so desperately wanted to see. I asked him if he truly believed them. I asked him to look at me, really look at me, and tell me if he trusted his mother and Jamal more than he trusted his own wife. I asked him if 5 years of partnership, of me supporting him, of me caring for his father, when no one else would meant less to him than a few grainy photos and the word of a man who had never told the truth in his life. The room went silent. For a second, just a fraction of a second, I saw hesitation in Jason's eyes. I saw a flicker of doubt. He looked at the photos on the floor, then at me, then at Jamal. But then he looked at Patricia. She didn't say a word. She just raised an eyebrow. That was all it took. The flicker died. The doubt vanished. The conditioning kicked in. Jason's face hardened into a mask of sneering contempt. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. He told me that trust was earned and I had squandered it. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. He told me that Jamal was his brother-in-law. He said Jamal was family. He called Jamal a moral man, a man of faith, a man who understood loyalty. The irony was so sharp, it almost cut me physically. He was calling Jamal the man who was currently wearing his father's stolen watch and sleeping with his mother, a moral beacon. He was defending the parasite that was eating his life from the inside out. And then Jason delivered the final blow, the words that severed the last thread of my restraint. He looked me up and down with disgusted eyes and told me that I was just a gold digger. He said he should have listened to his mother years ago. He said I had trapped him, that I had only married him for the Vance name and the lifestyle he provided. He said I was a leech who had sucked him dry and was now looking for a richer host. He said I was pathetic for trying to turn him against his own blood. A gold digger. The accusation bounced around my skull. He thought I was with him for his money. He thought the meager salary he brought home from his mid-level sales job was what kept me around. He had no idea that I paid the mortgage on this house through a shell corporation so he wouldn't feel emasculated. He had no idea that the vacations we took, which he thought were paid for by his bonuses, were actually funded by my dividends. He had no idea that I had a net worth that could buy and sell his entire family 10 times over. He thought he was the prize. He thought he was the victim. He stood there, chest puffed out, righteous in his ignorance, defending the very people who were plotting to leave him destitute. He was protecting the wolf and biting the hand that fed him. It was a level of cognitive dissonance that was almost impressive. They had successfully gaslit him into believing that up was down, that black was white, and that his loyal wife was the enemy, while the snakes in the grass were his saviors. I looked at Emily, who was nodding in agreement with Jason's assessment, wiping her fake tears. I looked at Jamal, who was smirking, secure in his victory. I looked at Patricia, who looked bored, ready to wrap this up and open another bottle of wine. They were so sure of themselves. They were so confident that they had won. They thought they had cornered a frightened, helpless housewife who would do anything to avoid a scandal. But they were wrong. They hadn't cornered a housewife. They had cornered the CEO of Aegis Analytics. They had cornered a woman who hunted fraudsters for a living. They thought they were applying pressure, but all they had done was flip the switch that turned off my empathy and turned on my tactical response protocols. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself against the gold digger comment. I didn't try to explain my bank balance. There was no point. They wouldn't believe me, and frankly, I didn't want them to know yet. I wanted them to feel the full weight of their mistake when the truth came out. I took a deep breath, letting the cold, hard reality of the situation settle in my chest. Jason had made his choice. He had chosen the lie. He had chosen the abuse. He had chosen them. So be it. I looked at Jason one last time, memorizing the hatred in his eyes, so I would never ever be tempted to feel sorry for him again. I realized then that the man I loved was dead. Maybe he never existed. The thing standing in front of me was just a casualty of war, a collaborator who had sided with the enemy. And as any good soldier knows, you don't show mercy to collaborators. You neutralize them. The gaslighting was over because I refused to accept their reality. I had my own reality stored on a secure server, ready to be broadcast in high definition. They wanted me to kneel no. I would make them fall. Jason's demand for an apology hung in the air unanswered. My silence was the only response he was going to get, and as his face turned redder with frustration as his hand twitched towards his belt again, I knew we had reached the point of no return. The psychological torture had failed. Now he would resort to the physical, and that would be his final mistake. I decided that the theater production had gone on long enough. The air in the room was stale with the smell of their hypocrisy and the cheap wine Patricia was nursing, and I was physically repulsed by their presence. I uncrossed my legs and stood up from the beige sofa. I moved slowly, deliberately smoothing the fabric of my dress over my thighs, as if I were preparing to leave a boring business meeting rather than a family intervention. I did not ask for permission to rise. I did not look at Jason with the pleading eyes of a victim. I simply occupied my full height, pulled my shoulders back, and looked down at them with the kind of indifference usually reserved for insects. I picked up my purse from the side table. The leather strap felt cool in my hand, a grounding anchor in the chaos. I looked directly at Jason, who was breathing heavily, his chest heaving with the exertion of his manufactured rage. I told him in a voice that was barely above a whisper, yet carried to every corner of the room, that I would not be signing anything today. I told him that I was done listening to his delusions, and that any further communication would happen through my legal counsel. I turned my back on him and took a step toward the hallway, intending to walk out the front door and never look back. But I didn't make it 3 steps. Jason moved with a speed I didn't know he possessed. He lunged across the Persian rug, placing his body between me and the archway that led to freedom. He slammed his hand against the wall, blocking my path, creating a physical barrier with his bulk. His face was inches from mine, contorted into a mask of ugly, raw fury. The vein in his forehead was throbbing, a visual metronome of his losing control. He screamed that I didn't get to walk away. He screamed that I didn't get to dictate the terms in his house. He was shouting so loud that spit flew from his mouth, landing on my cheek. I didn't wipe it off. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I just stared at him. And that was the catalyst. That was the spark that ignited the powder keg. You see, men like Jason are weak. They build their entire sense of self-worth on the idea that they are in charge, that they are the kings of their little castles. They need fear to validate their power. They need tears to feel strong. When I refused to give him that reaction, when I refused to cower or beg or cry, I wasn't just disobeying him, I was erasing him. My calmness was a mirror, reflecting his own impotence, and he couldn't handle what he saw. He grabbed my upper arm. His fingers dug into my flesh hard enough to leave bruises that would turn purple by morning. He tried to shove me back toward the center of the room, treating me like a rebellious child or a disobedient dog. He told me to sit down and shut up. He said I would sign the papers now, or he would make me regret the day I was born. The threat was generic, a cliché from a bad movie, but the intent behind it was real. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to break the shell of my indifference and find the frightened woman he thought was hiding underneath. I pulled my arm from his grip with a sharp, violent jerk. The movement was so precise and forceful that he stumbled back a step. I dusted off the sleeve where he had touched me, looking at the fabric with open disgust. I told him to never touch me again. My voice dropped an octave, losing all traces of warmth, becoming the cold, metallic voice I used when firing incompetent executives. I saw the shock in his eyes. He wasn't used to resistance. He was used to the Serena who cooked dinner and nodded politely at his boring stories. He didn't know this woman. And because he didn't know her, he wanted to destroy her. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from tension to danger. Jason's eyes glazed over. The rational part of his brain, the part that cared about consequences or laws, shut down. He was operating on pure primal instinct now. He reached down to his waist. His hands were shaking, fumbling with the buckle of his designer leather belt. The sound of the metal tongue clicking against the buckle seemed to echo in the sudden dead silence of the room. It was a sound that every victim of domestic tyranny knows. It is the sound of authority preparing to assert itself through pain. Patricia stopped swirling her wine. She leaned forward in her armchair, her eyes glittering with a sick fascination. She wasn't horrified. She wasn't telling her son to stop. She was watching him with approval. She was watching him become the man she raised him to be, a bully who used force when manipulation failed. Jamal stopped smirking. He pulled out his phone, holding it up ready to record. He wasn't filming to protect me. He was filming to gather leverage, hoping to catch me fighting back so they could claim self-defense later. Emily buried her face in her hands, peering through her fingers, terrified but unable to look away. Jason pulled the belt free from the loops with a long, sharp zipping sound. It was a thick brown leather strap with a heavy brass buckle. He doubled it over in his hand, creating a loop. He snapped it taut. Crack. The sound was sharp, like a pistol shot in the confined space. He stepped toward me, swinging the belt loosely by his side, a pendulum of violence. He told me that I wasn't going anywhere until he allowed it. He said he was the man of the house, and it was time I learned my place. He said that if I wouldn't listen to reason, maybe I would listen to the belt. He was trying to terrify me. He wanted me to fall to my knees and plead for mercy. He wanted to see me break. But as he raised his arm, brandishing the leather strap like a weapon, he made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was trapping a helpless victim. He didn't realize he was locking himself in a room with a predator who had been waiting years for an excuse to strike. I watched the belt. I calculated the distance. I assessed his stance, and inside my mind the final safety lock disengaged. I wasn't leaving anymore. I was staying for the show. The leather belt whistled through the air. It was a sound that seemed to slice through the tension in the room, sharp and terrifyingly fast. Jason did not aim for my face, not yet. He swung the heavy brass buckle down with all the force of his suppressed inadequacy, targeting the space right next to where I stood. He wanted to demonstrate the destruction he was capable of before he inflicted it on my body. The metal buckle collided with the glass surface of the coffee table, specifically striking the heavy crystal centerpiece that had been a wedding gift from his aunt. The impact was explosive. The sound was not just a crack, but a deafening shatter that echoed off the high ceilings like a gunshot in a canyon. The crystal vase disintegrated instantly, sending a shower of jagged shards flying outward like shrapnel from a grenade. I did not flinch, but physics is unavoidable. A razor-sharp triangle of glass, moving at high velocity, sliced across the back of my left hand. It wasn't a deep gash, but it was clean and immediate. For a second there was no pain, just the shock of impact. Then a thin red line appeared on my skin, rapidly widening as the blood began to bead and rise to the surface. I looked down at my hand. A single perfect drop of crimson blood welled up and rolled down my wrist, dripping onto the pristine white Persian rug that Patricia loved more than her grandchildren. The contrast was stark, red on white, violence on luxury. The sting arrived a moment later, a sharp burning sensation that anchored me in reality. I didn't grab my hand. I didn't cry out. I simply watched the blood flow with a detached clinical curiosity. In my line of work, we call this collateral damage, but in this living room, it was something else. It was evidence. Jason stood panting, his chest heaving, the belt hanging limp in his hand. He looked at the shattered glass, then at the blood dripping from my hand. For a fleeting microsecond, I saw panic in his eyes. He hadn't meant to draw blood so quickly. He had meant to scare me into submission, not maim me. But then he looked at his mother. Patricia did not gasp. She did not rush to get a first aid kit. She did not reprimand her son for destroying the furniture or hurting his wife. She sat perfectly still on the velvet sofa, her legs crossed at the ankle, holding her wine glass by the stem. She took a slow, deliberate sip of the expensive red blend, her eyes locked on mine over the rim of the glass. There was no horror in her gaze. There was satisfaction. She lowered the glass and licked her lips, savoring the moment as if it were a scene from a play she had commissioned. She leaned back, getting comfortable, and spoke with a voice that was terrifyingly calm. She told Jason that he was doing the right thing. She used an old phrase, something her own tyrannical father used to say, but she adapted it for the moment. She said that a wife is like a wild horse, and sometimes you have to break them before they can be useful. She told him not to stop. She said I needed to be taught a lesson from the moment I walked into this family, and since I hadn't learned it through words, I would have to learn it through pain. She encouraged him to hit me again. She told him to beat the arrogance out of me until I remembered that I was nothing without the Vance name. It was a chilling display of maternal encouragement. She wasn't just condoning domestic violence, she was orchestrating it. She was the general on the hill ordering her foot soldier to commit the atrocity so she wouldn't get blood on her own hands. She looked at my bleeding hand and smiled a cold, thin curling of her lips that told me she had wanted to see me bleed for years. To my right, Jamal laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was the chuckle of a predator who realizes the prey is trapped. He held his smartphone steady, the camera lens pointed directly at us. He moved slightly to get a better angle, framing Jason and me in the shot. He wasn't filming to protect me. He was directing the narrative. He called out to Jason, his voice loud enough to be picked up by the microphone. He said he was rolling. He narrated the scene for the future jury he imagined in his head. He said that I had lunged at Jason first. He lied smoothly, claiming that I had thrown the glass at Jason and that Jason was only defending himself. Jamal grinned at me from behind the phone. He told me that he had the evidence now. He said if I tried to call the cops, he would show them this video of me acting crazy. He said it would be my word against the video evidence of a hysterical woman attacking her husband. He was building a frame job in real time. He was confident that his edited, narrated version of reality would supersede the truth. He thought he was smart. He thought he was holding the ace of spades. Jason, fueled by his mother's approval and his brother-in-law's legal cover, gripped the belt tighter. The hesitation vanished. He felt justified now. He felt protected. He stepped over the broken glass, his shoes crunching on the shards. He raised the belt again, this time aiming higher, aiming for the soft flesh of my arm or my shoulder. He told me to look at him. He shouted that I was going to get on my knees and beg, or the next one wouldn't miss. He said I had made him do this. He said I brought this on myself by being stubborn. I stood my ground, feeling the warm trickle of blood reach my fingertips. The pain in my hand was sharp, but it was distant, muffled by the adrenaline flooding my system. I didn't look at Jason. I looked at the blood on the floor. That drop of blood was the final signature on their death warrant. By drawing blood, by encouraging the violence, by filming it with the intent to frame me, they had crossed the line from a civil dispute into criminal felony. They had given me everything I needed. I looked up at Jason, and for the first time I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a demolition expert who has just connected the final wire. I didn't speak to Jason. I didn't speak to Patricia. I spoke to the room, to the hidden microphones, to the cloud servers recording every pixel of this nightmare. I whispered that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Jason didn't hear me over the rushing of blood in his ears. He pulled his arm back for the second strike, ready to bring the leather down. He thought he was the one holding the weapon. He had no idea that the real weapon was about to go off, and it wasn't in his hand. It was in mine. And I was done waiting. There is a specific moment in every crisis management operation where the chaos peaks and then suddenly vanishes. It is the eye of the storm. It is the moment when the panic of the victim is replaced by the cold, hard calculation of the fixer. As I looked down at the bright red blood welling up on the back of my hand, tracing the path of the vein, I felt that shift happen. It was physical. It felt like a heavy steel door slamming shut inside my mind. Behind that door, I locked away Serena the wife. I locked away the woman who had spent 5 years trying to please a mother-in-law who hated her. I locked away the woman who had nursed her husband through the flu, who had planned surprise birthday parties, who had hoped that love would eventually be enough. That woman was a liability. She was emotional. She was vulnerable. And as of this moment, she no longer existed. In her place, the CEO of Aegis Analytics stepped forward. The transition was instant and absolute. The pain in my hand didn't disappear, but it changed. It was no longer a sensation of hurt. It was merely a status update from a damaged peripheral. Pain is just information. It tells you the body is under attack. It tells you to neutralize the threat. My heart rate, which had spiked when the glass shattered, dropped back down to a resting 60 beats per minute. I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the scent of my own blood and the stale air of the room, and when I exhaled, I purged the last ounce of empathy I held for the people standing around me. I looked up from my hand and scanned the room. I didn't see my family anymore. My brain, now operating on full tactical power, overlaid a new interface onto reality. Jason was no longer my husband. He was hostile subject alpha. He was a blunt instrument, volatile and stupid, currently holding a weapon, but lacking the conviction to use it effectively. He was relying on intimidation, which meant he was weak. Patricia was no longer my mother-in-law. She was the primary target. She was the architect of the fraud, the one pulling the strings. She was a high-value asset to be liquidated. Jamal was the accomplice, the weak link in the chain, arrogant and careless, providing the digital footprint I needed to hang them all. Emily was collateral damage, a non-combatant who had chosen the wrong side of the line. Time seemed to slow down. I could see the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light from the window. I could see the sweat trickling down Jason's temple. I could see the greed in Patricia's eyes. They were all waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the tears, for the begging, for the submission. They wanted the satisfaction of seeing the successful, independent woman reduced to a trembling mess. They had no idea that the woman they were looking at was currently calculating the most efficient way to end their lives. Not physically. That would be too easy, and frankly, too messy. I was going to end them socially, financially, and legally. I was going to erase their future. I didn't need to call the police, not yet. Calling the police now would be a mistake. It would turn this into a domestic dispute. It would be he said, she said. Jamal had his video. They had their story. If the police arrived now, Jason would claim I cut myself. He would claim I was hysterical. No. I needed to control the narrative. I needed to present the evidence in a way that was undeniable, irrefutable, and absolutely devastating. I needed a grand jury indictment, not a police report. Slowly, with the deliberate grace of a predator stalking its prey, I reached into the pocket of my dress. Jason flinched. He tightened his grip on the belt, expecting me to pull out a weapon, perhaps pepper spray or a knife. When he saw the sleek black shape of my smartphone, he relaxed slightly, a sneer returning to his face. He thought I was calling 911. He thought I was panicking. He took a step forward, ready to snatch the phone from my hand, ready to tell me that no one was coming to save me. But I wasn't dialing 911. I wasn't dialing anyone. My thumb moved across the screen with practiced speed, bypassing the emergency call function and opening the control center. I didn't look at the phone. I kept my eyes locked on Jason's, holding his gaze, daring him to strike me again. I wanted him to see the change in my eyes. I wanted him to see the void where his wife used to be. I wanted him to feel the sudden creeping chill of realizing that he was no longer the hunter. I tapped the screen mirroring icon. The list of available devices populated instantly. Living room TV, Samsung 85-inch. I selected it. The phone vibrated once, confirming the handshake. The connection was established. The bridge was built. I had just linked the most powerful database of incriminating evidence in the state of Connecticut directly to the massive screen that dominated their living room. Jason paused. He sensed something was wrong. The air in the room had changed. My silence wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a bomb counting down. He lowered the belt, slightly confusion clouding his rage. Why wasn't I screaming? Why wasn't I running? Why was I standing there bleeding with a look of absolute terrifying serenity on my face? I took a step toward him. He actually took a step back. The dynamic had flipped. Without saying a word, I had seized control of the room. I looked past him to Patricia. She had stopped drinking her wine. She was frowning, her instincts finally alerting her that the game had changed, that the mouse she had been toying with was actually a viper. She sat up straighter, her eyes darting between me and the phone in my hand. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to order Jason to take the phone, but it was too late. The data packets were already streaming. The file was already loading. I thought about the last 5 years. I thought about the holidays I spent cooking for them while they ignored me. I thought about the money I had silently funneled into their accounts to keep the lights on. I thought about the way Jason had looked at me on our wedding day, a look I now realized was just the satisfaction of acquiring a possession. I took all those memories, all those moments of love and hope, and I fed them into the furnace of my resolve. They burned bright and hot, fueling the cold determination that now coursed through my veins. This wasn't just revenge. This was an exorcism. I was purging the cancer from my life. I was cutting off the dead weight, and I was going to do it with style. I was going to do it in high definition. I was going to make sure that the image of their betrayal was burned into their retinas forever. I lifted the phone, slightly angling the screen so they couldn't see what was on it, but making it clear that the device was the source of their impending doom. I let the silence stretch for one more second, let the tension build until it was almost unbearable. Jamal was still filming, his camera focused on my face. Good. I wanted him to capture this. I wanted him to record the exact moment his life fell apart. I wanted this to be part of the official record. I looked at Jason, then at Patricia, then at Jamal. I met each of their gazes, acknowledging their presence, acknowledging their guilt. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and the court was now in session. My voice, when it finally broke the silence, was low, smooth, and devoid of any tremor. It was the voice I used when I told a CEO that his trusted partner was embezzling millions. It was the voice of absolute truth. You want a show? I asked the question, hanging in the air like a blade. You want drama? You want to film me? You want to talk about betrayal and secrets and who is sleeping with whom? I paused, letting the questions sink in. I saw Jason's brow furrow. I saw Patricia's hand tighten on the armrest. They didn't understand. Not yet. But they would. Fine, I continued, my thumb hovering over the play button on my screen. If you want a performance, I will give you one. But be warned, this isn't a comedy, it's a tragedy. And you are all the stars. I stepped to the side, clearing the line of sight between them and the massive television screen behind me. I gestured to the black rectangle that was about to become their tombstone. You want to see the truth? I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than any scream. You want to see who is really destroying this family? You want to know what I've been doing while you were busy mocking me? I looked at Jason one last time. I saw the fear finally take root in his eyes. He knew. Deep down in the part of his brain that wasn't poisoned by his mother, he knew that he had made a catastrophic error. He opened his mouth to say my name, to tell me to stop, but the words died in his throat. I smiled. A cold, sharp, dangerous smile. Okay then, I said. You want a show? Fine. I will show you the most expensive movie of your entire lives. I pressed the button. The giant Samsung television mounted above the fireplace did not flicker. It did not show static. It roared to life with the crisp, unforgiving clarity of 4K resolution. The silence in the living room was instantly replaced by the digital hum of the audio system kicking in, filling the space with a sound quality so realistic it felt like the people on the screen were standing right beside us. Jason blinked his eyes, trying to adjust to the sudden brightness. He expected to see a grainy photo of me at a hotel. He expected to see a low-resolution image that confirmed his suspicions and justified his cruelty. He expected vindication. Instead, he saw his own parents' bedroom. The camera angle was perfect. It was positioned high on the bookshelf, hidden inside a hollowed-out vintage clock, capturing the entire expanse of the master suite. The lighting in the video was soft, the bedside lamps casting a warm golden glow over the expensive silk sheets that Patricia had imported from Italy. Every detail was visible. You could see the texture of the wallpaper. You could see the dust motes dancing in the light. You could see the framed photograph of Jason and Emily on the nightstand, turned face down. And you could see the two people tangled together on the bed. It took a moment for the brains of the people in the living room to process the visual information. It was so out of context, so impossible, that for a split second they just stared in confusion. The woman on the screen was wearing a silk robe that had slipped off her shoulders. It was Patricia, but not the Patricia sitting on the sofa holding a glass of wine. This was a Patricia from 2 weeks ago, looking younger, flushed, and undeniably alive. Beside her, propped up on the pillows that belonged to my father-in-law, was a man. He was shirtless, his chest heaving slightly, a glass of scotch in his hand. It was Jamal. The image was grotesque in its clarity. You could see the sweat on Jamal's skin. You could see the way his hand rested possessively on Patricia's knee. You could see the gold Rolex Daytona Henry's stolen watch glinting on his wrist as he raised the glass to his lips. The timestamp in the corner of the screen marked the date as 14 days ago. The time was 2 in the morning. In the living room, the real Jamal lowered his phone. The smirk fell off his face as if it had been slapped away. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Patricia dropped her wine glass. It hit the rug with a dull thud, spilling red liquid that looked alarmingly like blood, but she didn't notice. Her eyes were fixed on her own image, her face draining of color until she looked like a wax figure. But the visual was only the first punch. The knockout blow was the audio. I had installed high-fidelity microphones in that room. The sound coming through the living room speakers was studio quality. Every rustle of the sheets, every clink of ice in the glass, every breath was amplified. On the screen, Jamal shifted, getting comfortable in the bed that belonged to the man he called Dad. He took a sip of scotch and spoke. His voice boomed through the living room, stripping away the lies he had just told. "When is the old man going to finally kick the bucket?" Jamal asked on the screen. His tone was bored, impatient, the voice of a man waiting for a package to be delivered. He swirled his drink, looking around the room with disdain. "I am getting sick of this waiting game, Patricia, and I am really getting sick of having to go back downstairs and crawl into bed with Emily." The mention of his wife's name was spat out with pure venom. On the screen, Jamal made a face of disgust. "She is so needy. She is always clinging to me, asking if I love her. It makes my skin crawl. I have to drink half a bottle of whiskey just to stomach touching her." In the living room, Emily let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. It was the sound of a heart breaking in real time. She put her hands over her ears, shaking her head, trying to unhear the words that were destroying her reality. But the volume was too loud. The truth was too pervasive. On the screen, Patricia laughed. It was a low, throaty laugh that chilled the air in the room. She reached out and stroked Jamal's arm, her fingers trailing over the stolen watch. "Patience, baby," she cooed. "Good things come to those who wait. Besides, we are almost at the finish line." She leaned over to the nightstand in the video and picked up a pill bottle. She held it up to the light, shaking it so the pills rattled. The sound was crisp and clear. "I changed the dosage again yesterday," Patricia said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "I doubled the sedative and cut the memory blockers in half. The doctor thinks his confusion is just the disease progressing. He has no idea I am mixing it with the tranquilizers I got from the vet." The room went deathly silent. Even Jason, who was holding the belt, seemed to stop breathing. This wasn't just adultery. This was a confession. This was the admission of systematic poisoning. Patricia on the screen continued, her voice dripping with malice. "He is already forgetting how to swallow. It won't be long now. The new will is ready to be signed. I just need him lucid enough to hold a pen for 10 seconds, and then he can go to hell." Jamal laughed on the video, clinking his glass against hers. "To the future," he toasted. "To us," Patricia replied. "And to the money." She took a sip of her drink and then looked directly at Jamal with a seriousness that was terrifying. Listen to me. The second the old man is in the ground and the will is executed, we are cleaning house. I am not splitting a dime of this estate with that useless idiot Jason or his whining sister. Jason's head snapped up. He looked at the screen, then at his mother sitting on the sofa. The betrayal hit him physically. He staggered back, dropping the belt. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, but no one looked at it. On the screen, Patricia was still talking, outlining the destruction of her children. Jason has no head for business. He would lose the fortune in a year. And Emily? Emily is a child. She doesn't need millions. She needs a reality check. We will give them a month to move out, and then we change the locks. The Hamptons house, the portfolio, the offshore accounts. It is all going to be under the new trust, controlled by you and me. Jamal grinned, leaning back against the headboard. God, I love it when you talk dirty, he said. So the plan is still the same. We dump them, liquidate the assets, and take that trip to Monaco. Patricia nodded. Monaco. Just you and me. No kids. No baggage. Just the money. The video continued, but the words began to blur into a nightmare of logistics. They discussed how to hide the assets. They discussed how to fake their grief at the funeral. They mocked Jason's attempt to start a business. They made fun of Emily's infertility struggles. They dissected every vulnerability of the people who loved them and figured out how to monetize it. I stood by the fireplace watching the video with a cold detachment. I had seen it a dozen times. I had transcribed it. I had legally notarized it. But watching their reaction was new. I looked at Jason. The man who had just threatened to beat me with a belt was now trembling. His face was a mask of absolute horror. He was looking at the woman who gave birth to him, the woman he had just defended against his wife, and he was watching her plan his financial execution. He was listening to her call him a useless idiot. He was watching her conspire with his brother-in-law to leave him homeless. I looked at Emily. She had slid off the love seat and was curled in a ball on the floor, rocking back and forth. The man she worshipped, the man she had defended against my accusations, had just admitted on camera that he was repulsed by her touch. He had admitted that he was only waiting for her father to die so he could divorce her and take her inheritance. I looked at Patricia and Jamal in the room. They were frozen. The arrogance was gone. The moral superiority was gone. They were stripped bare. There was no defense against this. They couldn't claim it was AI generated. They couldn't claim it was taken out of context. The fidelity of the recording captured every nuance of their conspiracy. It was a perfect digital mirror reflecting their souls, and the reflection was monstrous. On the screen, the video reached its climax. Jamal leaned in and kissed Patricia again. I cannot wait to get rid of them, he murmured against her lips. It is going to be so quiet around here without their constant whining. It will be paradise, Patricia whispered back. Just be careful with Jason. He is stupid, but he has a temper. Keep him thinking Serena is the enemy. As long as he is focused on hating her, he won't notice what we are doing to the bank accounts. Jamal laughed. Oh, don't worry. I have Jason wrapped around my little finger. I just tell him he is the big man, stroke his ego a little, and he does whatever I want. He is a puppet. A puppet. The word hung in the air of the living room. Jason looked at me. His eyes were wide red-rimmed and filled with a pain so raw it was almost palpable. He realized it now. He realized that every fight we had in the last 2 weeks, every suspicion he had, every accusation he hurled at me had been planted by Jamal. He had been played. He had been the weapon they used to attack me, all while they were sharpening the knife to stab him in the back. I reached out and paused the video. The image froze on a close-up of Jamal and Patricia toasting with their scotch glasses, smiling like demons. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavier than before. It was the silence of a bomb crater. I didn't need to say anything. The video had done the work. I had taken their narrative, their lies, their gaslighting, and I had obliterated it with 4 minutes and 12 seconds of high-definition truth. I looked at the frozen image on the screen, then turned to face the wreckage of the family. The trial was over. The verdict was guilty, and I was the only one left standing. The silence that followed the pausing of the video was not simply an absence of noise. It was a physical weight, a heavy, suffocating blanket that descended upon the room and crushed the air out of our lungs. The only sound remaining was the hum of the cooling fan inside the television, a low mechanical drone that seemed to mock the devastation it had just broadcast. For 10 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the laws of time had been suspended, trapping us all in a tableau of absolute ruin. Then the silence shattered. It started with a gasp, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like someone drowning. I looked down to see Emily. Her hands were trembling so violently that her entire body shook. She stared at the frozen image on the screen, her eyes wide and unblinking, unable to reconcile the husband she idolized with the monster who had just laughed about her infertility. Then the scream came. It was a primal, gut-wrenching shriek that tore through her throat, a sound of pure agony that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It wasn't just a cry of sadness. It was the sound of a woman whose entire universe had just been vaporized. Emily collapsed. Her legs simply gave out beneath her, and she hit the floor hard, not even trying to break her fall. She curled into a fetal position on the Persian rug, burying her face in her hands, sobbing with a violence that racked her small frame. She screamed Jamal's name, but it wasn't a call for help. It was a curse. She screamed about the baby they were trying to have. She screamed about the lies. Her wails echoed off the high ceilings, filling the space between the luxury furniture with the raw, ugly sound of a broken heart. I watched her with a detached pity. She was collateral damage, yes, but she had also stood by and watched them torment me. Her pain was real, but it was the necessary cost of the truth. My attention shifted to Jason. He was standing like a statue, his face drained of all color, leaving his skin a sickly gray tone. The leather belt the weapon he had been brandishing with such arrogant authority moments ago slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor with a dull, pathetic thud, lying there like a dead snake. He didn't look down at it. He couldn't take his eyes off his mother. He looked at Patricia, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see the matriarch he worshipped. He saw a stranger. He saw a predator. His lips parted, trembling, trying to form words that wouldn't come. He had just heard her call him a useless idiot. He had heard her plan to leave him destitute. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just that she was sleeping with his brother-in-law. It was that she despised him. She had used his loyalty as a weapon against his wife, all while planning to slit his throat financially. He turned his head slowly, mechanically, to look at Jamal, the man he had called a brother, the man he had defended against me, the man he had just allowed to film his assault on his wife. Jason's eyes filled with a mixture of horror and rage so potent it looked like madness. He realized he had been the puppet. He had been the fool. Every argument, every doubt, every wedge driven between us had been manufactured by the man standing next to him. Jamal felt the weight of Jason's gaze, but he didn't care about Jason anymore. The mask of the charming, moralizing brother-in-law had disintegrated completely. Panic had set in. I could smell it on him, a sour, acrid scent of fierce sweat, cutting through his expensive cologne. His eyes darted around the room, wild and desperate. He looked at the TV, then at his phone, then at me. He realized that his life, the easy money, the reputation, the future in Monaco, was evaporating. He looked at the remote control in my hand. In his panicked mind, that small plastic device was the source of all his problems. If he could get it, if he could stop the video, maybe he could stop the truth, maybe he could spin this, maybe he could claim it was fake. Denial is a powerful drug, and Jamal was overdosing on it. "Give me that!" he roared, his voice cracking. He didn't think. He didn't strategize. He just reacted. He lunged at me. He moved fast, covering the distance between us in 2 long strides, his hand outstretched to grab the remote, or perhaps to grab my throat. He was a large man over 6 feet tall, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. To an untrained observer, it would have looked terrifying. But I wasn't an untrained observer. I had spent 3 years training in Krav Maga, the Israeli military self-defense system. I trained 3 mornings a week with a former Special Forces instructor, not for fitness, but for survival. I dealt with dangerous people in my line of work, people with everything to lose. I knew that one day a cornered animal would attack me. My body knew what to do before my brain even processed the threat. As Jamal reached for me, time seemed to slow down. I saw the opening clearly. He was overextended, his weight was forward, his balance committed to the lunge. He was leading with his right arm, leaving his center of gravity exposed. I didn't step back. I stepped in. I dropped my center of gravity and pivoted on my left foot. I caught his outstretched wrist with my left hand, gripping it tight, while my right forearm slammed into his elbow joint. I used his own momentum against him. It wasn't a contest of strength. It was simple physics. I applied torque to the joint, rotating his arm backward in a way nature never intended it to bend. Jamal let out a yelp of surprise and pain as his forward momentum was suddenly redirected downward. I didn't stop there. I stepped through, sweeping his leg while simultaneously driving his arm down toward the coffee table, the same table Jason had shattered moments ago. Gravity and leverage did the rest. Jamal crashed downward. I guided his fall with precision, slamming his upper body onto the surface of the table. His face stopped just inches from the jagged, broken remains of the crystal vase and the razor-sharp shards of glass that still littered the surface. I maintained the pressure on his arm, twisting it up behind his back in a hammerlock that immobilized him completely. I pressed my other hand against the back of his neck, pinning his cheek against the smooth, unbroken section of the glass, forcing him to look directly at the wreckage. One wrong move, one struggle, and his face would be shredded by the glass shards right next to his eye. He gasped, struggling for air, his cheek smushed against the table. The fight went out of him instantly as he realized the precariousness of his position. He was pinned. He was helpless. The man who thought he was the alpha was now eating glass. I leaned down, bringing my lips close to his ears, so close that he could feel the warmth of my breath. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the icy, terrifying calm of a person holding absolute power. "Don't move," I whispered. He tried to squirm, but I applied a fraction more pressure to his twisted arm, sending a bolt of pain through his shoulder. He froze. "I wouldn't struggle if I were you, Jamal." I continued, my voice smooth and deadly. "You are 1 inch away from needing plastic surgery. And besides, you have an audience." I used my free hand to point toward the television screen where the paused video of his betrayal still glowed. But then I pointed to my phone, which was still mirroring to the TV. "Did you think I was just playing a video file?" I asked. I tapped the screen of my phone. The image on the TV changed. It minimized the video of the affair and brought up a live interface. It was a dashboard, a streaming dashboard. The words "live broadcast" flashed in the corner in red. "You are not just watching a movie, Jamal. You are the movie. I am currently live streaming this entire intervention to a private server. And guess who has the link?" I felt him stiffen beneath my grip. "The Greenwich Police Department, my attorney, and the board of directors of the charity foundation your wife runs." I tightened my grip on his neck, forcing him to look at the shards of glass. "So, Jamal, smile. You are on camera, and the police are already dispatching a unit. I suggest you stay very, very still." The room fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of total defeat. Jason stared at me, his mouth open, looking at his wife who had just taken down a man twice her size. Patricia looked at the screen, realizing that her secrets were being broadcast to the authorities in real time. And Jamal, pinned beneath my hand, closed his eyes and let out a whimper of pure terror. The trap had snapped shut, and I was the one holding the key. Jason stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water, his brain desperately trying to process the impossible sequence of events that had just unfolded. He looked at Jamal, who was whimpering on the table with his face pressed against the glass. He looked at the television screen, where the paused image of his mother's betrayal still glowed in high definition. And finally he looked at me. But he didn't look at me with anger anymore. The rage had evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating layer of confusion and terror. He took a half step forward, his hands shaking at his sides, and asked the question that had been burning in his mind since I tapped the phone screen. "Live stream," he stammered, his voice cracking on the syllables. "What do you mean live stream? What the hell are you doing, Serena? You put this on Facebook. You think your little friends on the internet are going to help you." He still didn't get it. Even now, standing in the wreckage of his life, he was clinging to the delusion that I was just a petty housewife playing with social media. He thought I was looking for likes. He thought this was a domestic spat that would air on a neighborhood gossip page. The smallness of his imagination was almost insulting. He was playing checkers while I was playing three-dimensional chess. I decided he had seen enough of me pinning his brother-in-law. I released the pressure on Jamal's arm. I shoved him away with a sharp, dismissive motion, sending him sliding off the table and onto the floor in a heap of groaning, expensive fabric. He scrambled backward, clutching his shoulder, looking at me as if I were a demon who had just climbed out of hell. I didn't give him a second glance. He was neutralized. He was irrelevant. I stood up slowly. I took a moment to smooth the fabric of my dress, brushing away a speck of invisible dust from my skirt. I adjusted my cuffs. I checked my watch. Every movement was deliberate, calm, and professional. I was shedding the skin of the victim and stepping fully into the armor of the executive. When I finally looked up at Jason, I didn't look at him as a wife looks at a husband. I looked at him as a CEO looks at a negligent employee she is about to terminate for cause. "You think this is Facebook?" I asked, my voice echoing in the silent room. "You think I am broadcasting this to a knitting circle?" I took a step toward him. He flinched. "Jason, you spent 5 years thinking you knew who I was. You thought I was Serena, the freelance graphic designer. You thought I made flyers for bake sales. You thought the money I contributed to the household came from a small inheritance from a grandmother. You never asked questions. You never looked at my tax returns. You were so busy being the man of the house that you never noticed the woman living in it." I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card. It was made of heavy black metal with gold embossed lettering. I flicked it toward him. It spun through the air and landed at his feet. "Pick it up," I ordered. He hesitated, then slowly crouched down and picked up the card. He stared at it. I saw his eyes widen as he read the title. "Aegis Analytics," he whispered. "Aegis Analytics," I repeated. "A private intelligence and forensic accounting firm based in New York City. We specialize in high net worth asset protection, corporate espionage countermeasures, and fraud detection. My clients are not bake sales, Jason. My clients are Fortune 500 companies, international banks, and sovereign wealth funds. And I am not a freelancer. I am the founder and chief executive officer." Jason looked up from the card, his face pale. He looked at the house around him, the walls he thought he owned, the smart system he thought he controlled. But he stuttered. "The cameras. The smart home upgrade. You said you bought it on sale at Best Buy." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. I lied. The system running this house is not a consumer product. It is a proprietary surveillance grid developed by my company's defense contracting division. It is military grade. It uses facial recognition, voice biometric analysis, and predictive behavioral algorithms. When I installed it 2 weeks ago, I didn't do it to improve your Wi-Fi. I did it because I knew someone was stealing from your father, and I needed to catch a rat. I pointed to the camera lens hidden discreetly in the molding of the ceiling. Every room in this house is wired. Every conversation you have had in the last 14 days has been recorded, transcribed, and uploaded to a secure cloud server. The camera in the bedroom, the microphone in the kitchen, the GPS tracker on your car, all of it. I know about the offshore accounts Patricia opened. I know about the fake invoices Jamal submitted to the charity. I know about the plan to declare Henry mentally incompetent. I have terabytes of data, Jason. I paused, letting the magnitude of the surveillance sink in. He looked like he was going to be sick. He realized that for 2 weeks he had been living in a glass cage, and I had been the scientist watching him run on his little wheel. And as for the live stream, I continued, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I am not streaming to the internet. I am streaming to a secure channel." I held up my phone again, showing him the active connection status. "The video you just watched. The video of your mother and Jamal conspiring to kill your father and cut you out of the will. That file was just automatically emailed to 2 very specific people." I took a step closer to him, invading his personal space, forcing him to look me in the eye. "Recipient number 1 is Arthur Sterling, your father's personal attorney, the man who holds the current will. By the time he finishes watching that video, the motion to suspend Patricia's power of attorney will already be drafted. The will they were trying to force Henry to sign is now nothing more than evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. Jason swallowed hard. He knew Arthur Sterling. He knew the man was a shark. And recipient number 2, I said, delivering the final blow, is Sheriff Miller. The color drained from Jason's face completely. Sheriff Miller was not just a police officer. He was a family friend of the Vances. He had known Henry for 30 years. He was a man who despised corruption, and more than that, he despised elder abuse. The system is configured to automatically alert law enforcement when it detects evidence of a violent felony or a threat to life, I explained calmly. When Jamal said on camera that he was overdosing Henry with tranquilizers, the system flagged it as an active homicide attempt. That live stream is currently playing on the dispatch screen at the precinct. I checked my watch again. We are about 5 minutes away from a SWAT team kicking down your front door. So no, Jason, I am not an unemployed housewife. I am the woman who just dismantled your entire criminal enterprise with a single email. I turned away from him, dismissing him as a threat. I walked over to the window and pulled back the heavy velvet curtain. In the distance, faintly but growing louder, I could hear the wail of sirens cutting through the quiet Greenwich afternoon. I turned back to look at them. Jamal was sobbing on the floor. Emily was catatonic. Patricia was staring at the wall, her mind broken. And Jason was holding my business card like it was a grenade. I told you, I said softly. I am Serena Vance, and you should have looked me up. The sound of sirens is distinct when you live in a quiet, gated community like ours. It starts as a low hum in the distance, a vibration in the air that you feel before you hear. But within seconds, it grows into a piercing wail that shatters the suburban peace. I stood by the fireplace and watched the red and blue lights begin to dance across the pale walls of the living room. They strobed through the sheer curtains, turning the luxurious space into a chaotic disco of law enforcement authority. The psychological impact of those lights is immediate. For the innocent, they signal rescue. For the guilty, they signal the end of the world. Jason flinched with every rotation of the lights. He looked toward the front door, terror etched into every line of his face. He wasn't afraid of the police because he had committed a crime. He was afraid because he realized his entire reality was about to be dismantled by men with guns and badges. Jamal, still on the floor, nursing his shoulder, tried to scramble backward, looking for a place to hide in a room that offered no sanctuary. He looked pathetic, a far cry from the arrogant man who had lectured me on morality just 10 minutes ago. Then came the sound of the front door being breached. I had unlocked the smart lock remotely via my phone the moment the first cruiser pulled into the driveway, but the tactical team didn't take chances with a potential homicide in progress. The heavy oak door flew open with a resounding crash that shook the floorboards. Heavy boots thundered against the marble foyer. The shouting was immediate, disciplined, and overwhelming. "Greenwich Police, show me your hands. Get on the ground, now!" The commands were barked with the kind of volume that bypasses the conscious brain and triggers pure compliance. A team of 6 officers in tactical gear swept into the living room, their weapons drawn, but lowered their eyes, scanning for threats. Leading them was Sheriff Miller. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing his standard uniform, his face grim and set in a line of hard determination. He looked around the room, assessing the situation in a single heartbeat. He saw the shattered glass. He saw the belt on the floor. He saw Jamal cowering. And he saw me standing calmly by the fireplace. Sheriff Miller and I locked eyes. I gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. He knew exactly what he was walking into. The automated alert from my system had sent him the audio clip of the death threat against Henry. He wasn't here for a noise complaint. He was here to stop a murder. "Secure him," Miller ordered, pointing a finger at Jamal. 2 officers moved on Jamal with terrifying speed. Jamal tried to raise his hands, stammering, trying to use his charm one last time. "Officer, please, this is a misunderstanding. I am family. We were just having a disagreement." The officer didn't care about his explanation. He grabbed Jamal's good arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him face down onto the Persian rug. The cold, metallic ratchet of handcuffs clicking into place echoed through the room. "Jamal Vance, you are under arrest," the officer recited, his voice flat and professional. Jamal yelled, his face pressed into the wool. Arrest. For what? I didn't do anything. My sister-in-law is crazy. She attacked me. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, looming over Jamal. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, a printout of the digital warrant that had been signed minutes ago by a judge who had viewed my evidence. You are under arrest for aggravated assault, domestic battery, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, Miller said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Conspiracy? Jamal shrieked. You are insane! We have the recording, Jamal Miller said, his voice dripping with disgust. We heard you discussing the overdose. We heard you talking about the vet tranquilizers. We have a team at your house right now executing a search warrant for the drugs. If we find them, you are looking at 20 years to life. Jamal went limp. The fight drained out of him instantly. The mention of the specific drugs, the vet tranquilizers, was the nail in the coffin. He knew we knew. He let out a sob, a sound of pure self-pity as the officers hauled him to his feet and began to drag him toward the door. My attention shifted to Patricia. Throughout the chaos of Jamal's arrest, she had remained seated on the sofa. She had pulled herself up to her full height, smoothing her skirt, trying to summon the air of the untouchable matriarch she had played for decades. She took a sip of her wine, her hand trembling only slightly. She watched Sheriff Miller approach her with a look of haughty disdain, as if he were a waiter who had brought her the wrong order. Patricia Miller said, stopping in front of the coffee table, "Put the glass down." Patricia stared at him. "I have known you for 30 years, Tom. Do not speak to me like a common criminal in my own house." Miller didn't blink. He reached out and took the glass from her hand, placing it on the table out of reach. "You are not the lady of the house anymore, Patricia. You are a suspect. Stand up." Patricia's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She stood up slowly, her chin raised in defiance. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "You are going to regret this. My lawyers will have your badge for this. You cannot arrest me based on some doctored video made by that jealous little girl." She pointed a manicured finger at me. Miller stepped between us, blocking her line of sight. "It is not just the video," Patricia Miller said quietly. "We just spoke to Henry's doctor. He confirmed the traces of sedatives in Henry's blood work from last week. He thought it was an anomaly. Now he knows it was poison. You are under arrest for attempted murder and elder abuse." The accusation hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, her legs hitting the sofa. Two female officers stepped forward, taking her arms. Patricia tried to pull away her composure, finally cracking. The reality of the situation, the handcuffs, the jail cell, the public humiliation crashed down on her. She wasn't going to Monaco. She was going to prison. As the cold steel of the cuffs locked around her wrists, Patricia lost her mind. The mask of civility vanished, revealing the feral creature underneath. She didn't look at Miller. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, manic, and filled with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "You!" she screamed, struggling against the officers. "You did this, you poisonous little snake! I knew you were trouble the moment Jason brought you home. I should have ruined you years ago." She lunged toward me, but the officers held her back easily. She was foaming at the mouth, her hair coming loose from its perfect bun. "You think you are smart?" she screeched, her voice cracking. "You think you have won. You are nothing. You are trash. I will bury you. I will spend every dime I have to destroy you." I stood perfectly still, watching her unravel. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just watched. It was fascinating to see how quickly the facade of high society crumbled when faced with consequences. She wasn't a sophisticated socialite. She was just a common criminal who had gotten away with it for too long. Sheriff Miller nodded to the officers. "Get her out of here." As they dragged her toward the door, Patricia kept screaming, turning her head to look back at me. "Jason!" she yelled to her son, who was standing paralyzed by the window. "Jason, do something. Don't let her do this to your mother. She is the enemy. Kill her. Kill her, Jason." The demand echoed in the room, chilling everyone to the bone. Even the police officers looked shocked by the raw malice in her voice. She was ordering a hit on me in front of witnesses. It was over. She had just handed the prosecutor everything he needed to lock her away forever. I watched her disappear out the front door, her screams fading as they shoved her into the back of a cruiser. The room suddenly felt very large and very quiet. The flashing lights outside continued their silent rhythm, painting the walls in alternating shades of emergency red and blue. Sheriff Miller turned to me. He looked tired. He looked sad. He had been a guest at parties in this house. He had shaken Henry's hand. "I am sorry it came to this, Serena," he said softly. "We have paramedics on the way to check on Henry, and to check on your hand." I looked down at my hand. The blood had dried, forming a dark crust over the cut. I had forgotten it was there. "Thank you, Sheriff," I said, my voice steady. "I have the full data logs ready for transfer to your department. You will find everything you need to build the case. The forensic accounting, the video files, the medical records. It is all there." Miller nodded respectfully. "You did good work, Serena. Dangerous work, but good. We will take it from here." He turned to leave, but stopped and looked at Jason and Emily. "We are not taking them in yet," Miller said, "but don't leave town. We will need statements." I nodded. "They won't be going anywhere, Sheriff. They don't have anywhere to go." As the front door closed behind the police, leaving me alone with my husband and his sister, I took a deep breath. The house was no longer a prison. It was a crime scene, and I was the only one who knew how to clean it up. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But I couldn't rest yet. There was one final piece of business to attend to. I turned my gaze to Jason, who was staring at the spot where his mother had been standing, looking like a man who had just watched his own soul be dragged away in handcuffs. The front door clicked shut, sealing the two of us inside the house that was no longer a home. The silence that followed was different from the silence during the video. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. The police were gone. The screaming mother was gone. The handcuffed brother-in-law was gone. The hysterical sister was gone. It was just me and Jason standing in the wreckage of our marriage, surrounded by shattered glass and the invisible debris of 5 years of lies. Jason stood by the window for a long moment, watching the last police cruiser fade down the driveway. When he finally turned to face me, the transformation was complete. The arrogance was gone. The rage was gone. The man who had stood 10 feet tall with a leather belt in his hand just 20 minutes ago had shrunk. He looked small, deflated, and pathetic. His shoulders slumped. His face was a mask of gray ash, and his eyes were swimming with tears that I knew were born of fear, not remorse. He took a step toward me, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Then his knees simply gave out. He didn't fall from impact. He fell from the sheer weight of his own failure. He collapsed onto the rug landing amidst the chaos he had helped create, and he began to crawl toward me. It was a grotesque sight. My husband, the man who demanded I kneel before his mother, was now dragging himself across the floor to my feet. "Baby," he choked out, his voice cracking into a sob. "Baby, please. You have to listen to me." He reached out his hands, trembling, trying to grasp the hem of my dress. I took a deliberate step back, keeping myself just out of his reach. I looked at his hands, the same hands that had held the belt, the same hands that had pushed me, the same hands that had signed checks from our joint account to buy gifts for his mother while I paid the mortgage. I felt nothing, no pity, no anger, just a cold, clinical detachment. I was tricked. "Serena," he cried, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know what they were doing. Jamal told me you were cheating. He showed me the pictures. He made me believe it." He scrambled forward again, desperate to close the distance. "I was just trying to protect the family," he pleaded. "You have to understand. Mom said you were trying to ruin us. Jamal said you were going to take the house. I was scared. I was just trying to be a good son. I was trying to be a good brother. I didn't know they were poisoning Dad. I didn't know about the money. I am a victim here too, Serena." He buried his face in his hands, sobbing loudly. It was a performance, a bad one. He was trying to rewrite history in real time, casting himself as the innocent pawn who had been manipulated by evil masterminds. He wanted me to comfort him. He wanted me to drop to my knees, wrap my arms around him, and tell him it wasn't his fault. He wanted the wife who fixed everything to fix this too. But that wife was dead. She had died the moment he unbuckled his belt. I watched him cry for a full minute. I let him pour out his excuses, his rationalizations, his pathetic attempts to shift the blame. I listened to him say that he loved me, that he never wanted to hurt me, that he was just stressed and confused. I listened to every lie, filing them away in my mind, analyzing them for weaknesses. When his sobs finally subsided into wet sniffles, I spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, and stripped of all emotion. It was the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. "You say you didn't know Jason," I said, "but you never asked." He looked up, wiping his nose with the back of his hand, hope flickering in his eyes because I was engaging with him. "I trusted them," he stammered. "They are my blood. You trusted them," I repeated. "And because you trusted them, you decided I was a whore. Because you trusted them, you treated me like a servant in my own house. Because you trusted them, you threatened to beat me with a belt." I shook my head slowly. "You didn't trust them, Jason. You chose them. You chose the easy path. It was easier to believe I was the villain than to admit your mother was a monster. It was easier to bully me than to stand up to Jamal. You weren't a victim. You were a volunteer." "I didn't mean it," he begged, reaching for my hand again. I snapped. I was under so much pressure. "Please, Serena, we can fix this. Now that they are gone, it can just be us. We can start over. I will make it up to you. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." He managed to catch my fingers. His grip was clammy and desperate. He squeezed my hand, trying to reestablish the intimacy we once shared. He looked at me with those puppy dog eyes that used to work on me, the eyes that made me forgive his laziness, his selfishness, his lack of ambition. But when I looked down at him, I didn't see the man I married. I saw a stranger. I saw a weak, spineless creature who needed a host to survive. He had leeched off his mother, and now that she was gone, he was trying to attach himself to me. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a lifeline. I pulled my hand away from his grip. I wiped it on my dress, a gesture of pure revulsion that made him flinch. "You said you wanted to protect the family," I said, my voice hardening. "Yes," he nodded eagerly. "Yes, that is all I wanted. To protect us." I stared at him, my gaze piercing through his shallow defense. "You were right, Jason," I said. "This family did need to be protected." I leaned down, bringing my face close to his so he could see the absolute finality in my eyes. "It needed to be protected from you." He recoiled as if I had slapped him. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by confusion and a dawning horror. "From me," he whispered. "But I love you." I stood up straight, towering over him. I reached into my purse again. This time I didn't pull out a phone or a business card. I pulled out a thick folded document. It wasn't the manila envelope of divorce papers he had thrown at me earlier. Those were amateur hour. These were professionally drafted, ironclad legal documents prepared by the best matrimonial attorneys in New York City. I had carried them with me for months, waiting for the right moment, hoping I would never have to use them. But hope is not a strategy. I threw the papers at him. They fluttered down, landing on his chest, sliding onto his lap. "Sign it," I said. He looked down at the document. The bold letters at the top read, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." He picked it up, his hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. "Serena." "No," he cried. "Please don't do this. We can go to counseling. I will change. I promise." I laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound. "Counseling, Jason. You just tried to assault me while your brother-in-law filmed it. We are way past counseling. We are at the stage of damage control." He scrambled to his feet, clutching the papers to his chest like a shield. "I won't sign," he said, a sudden flash of his old petulance returning. "You can't make me. I have rights. This is my house, too. I want half. If you are really this secret CEO millionaire, then I am entitled to half of everything. It is marital property." I looked at him with genuine amazement. Even now, standing on the edge of the abyss, his greed was the first thing to surface. He thought he had leverage. He thought he could negotiate. He truly didn't understand who he was dealing with. I took a step closer to him. The air temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You want half?" I asked softly. "Half of Aegis Analytics. Half of my dividends." "Yes," he said, trying to puff out his chest, trying to be the man again. "I am your husband. I deserve it." I smiled. It was the smile of a predator who has just watched the prey walk into the final trap. Okay, Jason, let's talk about what you deserve. I pulled my phone out one last time. I tapped the screen and held it up. It wasn't a video this time. It was a spreadsheet, a complex, detailed forensic accounting ledger. Do you recognize the name Project Delta? I asked. Jason's face went white. Whatever courage he had summoned to demand his share evaporated instantly. His knees started to knock together. I don't know what you are talking about, he stammered. Don't lie to me, I snapped. Project Delta. The shell company you set up 3 years ago, the one you used to siphon money from your sales commissions before they hit our joint account. The one you used to hide your bonuses. He backed away, hitting the wall. How did you find that I am a forensic accountant, Jason? I said, stepping closer. I find money for a living. I found your little secret account 6 months ago. But that is not the interesting part. The interesting part is what you spent the money on. I swiped the screen. A list of transactions appeared. The Sapphire Club, the Velvet Lounge, late-night withdrawals at ATMs near gentlemen's clubs in the city. And let's not forget the direct Venmo payments to a woman named Crystal and another one named Tiffany. Jason was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face again. No, it is not what it looks like. It looks like embezzlement, Jason, I said, my voice cutting like a knife. You were stealing from your employer by inflating your expense reports, funneling the cash into a shell company, and using it to pay for strippers and prostitutes while you came home and told me we needed to budget better on groceries. I lowered the phone and looked him dead in the eye. I have the bank records. I have the IP addresses. I have the geolocation data from your phone, placing you at those clubs on nights you said you were working late. I have everything. He slid down the wall, crumbling into a heap on the floor again. He was done. He was destroyed. So here is the deal, I said, looking down at him. You are going to pick up a pen, and you are going to sign those papers. You are going to waive your right to spousal support. You are going to waive your claim to the house. You are going to waive your claim to any of my assets. You are going to leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Nothing. I paused, letting the ultimatum hang in the air, or I continued. I send this file to the IRS. I send it to your employer. And I post it on the same server where the police just watched your mother confess to murder. You will be fired, you will be audited, you will be prosecuted for tax fraud, and you will be publicly humiliated as a man who stole money to pay for sex while his wife paid his bills. Jason looked up at me. He looked at the papers in his hand. He looked at the phone. He realized he had no moves left. He was checkmated. Do we have a deal, Jason? I asked. He nodded, a jerky, broken movement. He couldn't speak. He just reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a pen, and uncapped it with trembling fingers. He didn't read the terms. He didn't argue. He placed the papers on the floor on top of the shattered glass and signed his name. He signed away his rights. He signed away his future. He signed away the last shred of his dignity. I watched him sign, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt light. The weight was gone. I reached down and snatched the papers from his hand before the ink was even dry. Good choice, I said. I turned my back on him and walked toward the door. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say to a stranger. I walked out into the cool evening air, leaving Jason Vance kneeling on the floor of a house he no longer owned, crying over a life he had thrown away with both hands. 6 months have passed since the day I walked out of the Vance estate, leaving my husband kneeling on a floor covered in shattered glass. I am currently dictating this recording from the corner office of Aegis Analytics on the 45th floor of a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. The view from here is breathtaking. I can see the Empire State Building to my left and the Hudson River to my right. It is a stark contrast to the view I had half a year ago when I was staring at the dirty dishes in Jason's sink, wondering if he would let me have enough money to buy laundry detergent. The silence in my office is not the silence of oppression, but the silence of power. My assistant just brought me an espresso and the morning briefing on the Vance family trial and the final disposition of their assets. Reading it gave me the kind of satisfaction that no amount of money can buy. Let's start with the only innocent person in this tragedy, my former father-in-law, Henry. 2 weeks after the police raid, Henry was moved to a private rehabilitation facility that I paid for. Once the sedatives and the vet tranquilizers were flushed from his system, his mind returned. The dementia diagnosis was largely a symptom of the poisoning. He is not fully young again, but he is lucid, he is sharp, and he is furious. He came to visit me yesterday walking with a cane but holding his head high. He sat in the leather chair across from my desk and thanked me for saving his life. He told me that he had finalized his new will that morning. In the old version, Patricia and Jason got everything. In the new version, executed while he was of sound mind and body, the entire Vance estate, including the properties, the investment portfolios, and the family trust, has been liquidated. 80% of the proceeds have been donated to charities that support victims of elder abuse and domestic violence. The remaining 20% he gifted to me. He said it was not an inheritance, but a payment for services rendered. He said I was the only child he had left who had a spine. As for the conspirators, their fate was less dignified. The trial was the talk of Greenwich for months. The video I played on the living room TV was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. There was no way to argue against it. The jury took less than an hour to return a guilty verdict. Patricia Vance, the woman who once looked down on me for buying wine at a supermarket, is now inmate number 7429 at the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury. She was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder and conspiracy. The last time I saw her was on the news being led out of the courthouse. She wasn't wearing Chanel. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her complexion. She looked old. She looked broken. And when she saw the cameras, she hid her face in shame. The matriarch who wanted to rule the world is now ruling a 6 by 8 foot concrete cell. Jamal fared no better. The search of his home uncovered the tranquilizers, the forged medical documents, and a stash of cash he had stolen from his wife's accounts. He tried to cut a deal. He tried to testify against Patricia to save himself, but the prosecutor wasn't interested. Jamal received 20 years without the possibility of parole. The man who bragged about his Rolex and his trips to Monaco will spend the prime of his life making license plates. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he cries at night. He tells the guards that he is a victim, that he was manipulated. But nobody listens. In prison, charm doesn't work. Only survival matters, and Jamal is not a survivor. Emily was never charged with a crime. Her stupidity was her defense. The police determined she genuinely didn't know about the poisoning plot. But ignorance has a price. When the truth came out about Jamal's theft, Emily was left with nothing. Her trust fund was drained. Her house was foreclosed on. The friends she thought she had abandoned her the moment the scandal broke. Last week, I went to the local grocery store near my old neighborhood. I was buying a bottle of champagne to celebrate a new contract. As I stood in the checkout line, I saw the cashier. She looked tired. Her hair was messy, and her uniform was stained. It was Emily. She was scanning items, listening to customers complain about prices, doing the exact job she used to mock me for. I placed the champagne on the belt. She looked up, and our eyes met. I saw the recognition hit her. I saw the shame flood her face. She looked down quickly, mumbling the total. I paid with my black card, the same card her brother had tried to cut up. I didn't say a word. I didn't gloat. I just took my receipt and walked away. Her punishment is her life. She has to wake up every day knowing she married a monster and stood by while he destroyed her family. And finally we come to Jason, my husband, the man who promised to love and cherish me. He signed the divorce papers that day on the floor, and he signed away his rights to everything. He thought he could start over. He thought he could get a new job, a new girl, a new life. He was wrong. The forensic accounting report I threatened to release found its way to his employer anyway. I didn't send it, but corporate compliance departments are very thorough when a major scandal hits the news. Jason was fired for cause. He was blacklisted from the industry. No legitimate company will hire a man who stole from his expense account to pay for prostitutes. I hired a private investigator to check on him one last time before I closed the file. The report is sitting on my desk right now. Jason is currently living in a basement apartment in Queens, illegally subletting a room with no windows. He is working under the table as a dishwasher at a diner because his wages are being garnished by the IRS for back taxes. He lost his car, he lost his friends, he lost his dignity. The investigator attached a photo. Jason is standing on a street corner smoking a cheap cigarette, wearing a coat that looks 2 sizes too big. He looks 20 years older. He looks like a ghost. He is still being chased by debt collectors for the loans he took out to try and maintain his lifestyle. He calls me sometimes from blocked numbers. I never answer. I just let it go to voicemail and then I delete it without listening. I don't need to hear his apologies. I don't need to hear his regrets. The silence of his absence is the only closure I need. This journey started with a belt cracking against a table, and it ended with a gavel banging in a courtroom. It was a painful road, but it was necessary. I learned that you cannot build a life on a foundation of lies. I learned that loyalty is expensive, and you should not expect it from cheap people. But most importantly, I learned who I really am. I am not the victim. I am not the betrayed wife. I am Serena Vance, and I am unbreakable. Sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the person holding your life in their hands. They mistake silence for weakness. They mistake patience for fear. They think because you are not screaming, you are not fighting. But they forget that the predator does not roar before it strikes. It waits, it watches, and when it moves, it is already too late. I was the quiet wife in the corner. I was the one they laughed at. I was the one they thought they could control. And because of their arrogance, they lost everything. Jason, Patricia, and Jamal thought they were playing a game. They thought they were the chess masters moving the pawns. They didn't realize that I owned the board. They didn't realize that while they were planning their little trip to Monaco, I was building a fortress. Now they are locked in cages of their own making, and I am free. I have my company, I have my dignity, and I have the future that they tried to steal. So let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can bully their way through life. Let this be a warning to anyone who thinks they can mistreat a woman because she seems gentle. You never know what someone is capable of until you push them too far. You never know what secrets they are keeping. You never know if the person serving you dinner is secretly the CEO of the company that owns your mortgage. I want to hear from you. We have walked through this fire together. We have seen the betrayal, the violence, and the ultimate justice. I want to know which moment gave you the most satisfaction. Was it when I snapped Jamal's arm on the living room table and made him eat glass? Or was it when Jason fell to his knees crying and begging for forgiveness after realizing he was homeless? Which payoff felt sweeter to you? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have ever had to stand up to a bully, if you have ever had to reclaim your power, hit that like button and subscribe. There are more stories to tell, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Until then, remember to keep your head high, keep your files encrypted, and never ever let them see you bleed.